The scream that came out of me did not sound human. It sounded like a smoke alarm had married a wounded goat, and both of them had chosen my bathroom as the place to die. I stumbled backwards so fast I nearly hit the sink. My toothbrush flew out of my hand, toothpaste splattered across the counter. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt, and for one awful second I could not breathe. Because there, on the shower wall, was a giant bug. A giant one. Not a normal bug. Not a, maybe I can trap it under a cup kind of bug. Not a, if I leave and come back, maybe it will be gone kind of bug. No, this thing looked thick, dark, hairy. Wrong. It clung to the tile like it paid rent, like it had been waiting for me, like it knew I had entered and had chosen violence. I hate bugs. Actually, hate is too soft. I fear them in a way that removes every intelligent thought from my brain and replaces it with one loud command. Run. I yanked the bathroom door open and screamed for my husband. Dan! My voice cracked on the second half of his name. One cat bolted down the hallway like I had announced the apocalypse. The other one, because she was born without useful fear, walked toward the bathroom with mild interest. Dan! I shouted again. There's something in the shower. I heard quick footsteps. Then Dan appeared in the doorway, wearing the exact expression of a man trying to decide whether this was a real emergency or one of my completely unnecessary emotional events. What happened? I pointed with a shaking hand. In there. On the wall. Kill it. He leaned slightly and looked into the shower. And then, to my absolute disbelief, he started laughing. Not a chuckle. Not a polite smile, not even an annoying little nose exhale. He bent forward and laughed so hard he had to grab the doorframe. I stared at him. I was in genuine terror. He was out here acting like he had front row seats to a comedy show. What is wrong with you? I snapped. Why are you laughing? Kill it. He wiped under one eye, still laughing. Look again. I am not looking again. Look properly. I looked properly the first time. That thing is huge. By now, he was shaking his head, trying to calm down. It's not a bug. That made no sense. It was very clearly bug-shaped. It is absolutely a bug, I said. Dan inhaled, straightened up, and looked at me with the patient expression of a man about to explain to a child that the monster under the bed is actually a pile of laundry. No, he said. It's a hairball. For a second, I just blinked at him. A what? A hairball. I looked from him to the shower and back again. My fear did not leave all at once. It loosened slowly, like a knot coming undone. I edged closer, but not too close, because I did not yet trust him. Dan has many wonderful qualities, but he also enjoys being right far too much. I leaned and squinted, and then I saw it. Not legs, not wings. Not antennae, just hair. A giant, wet clump of hair stuck to the tile. I froze. The terror drained out of me so quickly it left behind pure humiliation. Dan folded his arms. Surprise! I turned to look at him. You put that there? His mouth twitched. Yes. You stuck a drain hairball to the shower wall? Yes. You psycho. He smiled. And yet, suddenly, you noticed it. I wanted to be furious. I really did. I wanted to unleash the full power of righteous wife outrage and make him regret every life choice that had brought him to this moment. But the problem was, he had me. Completely. Because yes, I had noticed it. Immediately. Viscerally. With my whole soul. And that was exactly his point. I pulled off my glasses and rubbed my face. You are such an ass. Maybe, he said, but I'm an ass who has been cleaning your hair out of the drain for years. Our hair, I corrected automatically. He gave me a look. I sighed. Fine. My hair. And Callie's hair. At the sound of her name, Callie wandered into view like a celebrity arriving late to a scandal she had definitely caused. She was our long-haired cat, soft and dramatic, and fully convinced that every room in the house existed for her enrichment. She brushed against Dan's leg, then mine, then sat in the hallway like a fluffy little lawyer waiting for the verdict. She has no shame, Dan said. She's a cat. She likes the bathroom. She likes everywhere. She especially likes the shower. That part was true. Kelly had developed an inexplicable fascination with the shower, not during actual showering because she was not insane, but before and after. She liked sitting in the tub, pawing at droplets, sniffing bottles, and rubbing against the sides like she was inspecting property she might buy. And because life is cruel and funny, the cat who loved the shower most also shed enough fur to build a second cat every 3 days. Then, there was me. Without my glasses, I do not see details. I see shapes, colors, blurry confidence. I function by routine. Shampoo is the clear bottle. Conditioner is the pink one. Face wash is the short blue one. Razor is left corner. Loofah hangs on the handle. Routine compensates for vision. But the drain? The drain is only visible once you are actually inside the shower, and by then, I am not thinking about drain maintenance. I am thinking about not falling over, not confusing conditioner with body wash, and not getting water directly in my eyes like some kind of amateur. Dan knew all of this. And for years, this had created a stupid little cycle. He would shower after me and emerge holding a horrifying wet wad of hair between 2 fingers, like evidence from a crime scene. Seriously, I would make the same guilty face every time. Callie would sit nearby, offering emotional support and zero accountability. Then I would say, "I'm sorry, I'll do better." And Dan, because he loves me for reasons I still do not fully understand, would sigh, throw it away, and move on. Until, apparently, today. I looked back at the wall. The hairball was somehow even more revolting now that I knew what it was. "You could have just told me," I muttered. "I have told you. I mean today. I wanted to make a point. You almost gave me a heart attack. You're being dramatic." I screamed so hard the toothpaste jumped. That part was impressive. I glared at him. He smiled with the evil calm of a man who knew history would judge him as both wrong and effective. Callie strolled into the bathroom, hopped into the dry shower, looked directly at the hairball, and then sat down like she saw nothing unusual. "Unbelievable," I whispered. Dan pointed at her. "There's your accomplice." I crossed my arms. "She doesn't know any better." "She knows chaos. That's not illegal. In this house, it should be." I wanted to laugh, but I was too offended. Also, too embarrassed. Because beneath the disgust and humiliation, a more annoying feeling had started creeping in. The sense that he was right. That is one of the hardest things in marriage. Not the big things. Everyone talks about the big things. Communication, trust, money, family, stress. But no one tells you some of the fiercest emotional battles in marriage are fought over things like who leaves cabinet doors open, who starts 3 alarms and ignores all of them, who replaces the toilet paper but leaves the empty roll there, and who keeps acting sorry about the drain without actually changing. Dan had reached his limit over shower hair, and instead of starting a fight, he chose psychological warfare. I took a slow breath. "Take it down." He raised an eyebrow. "Now you can see it." "Take it down." He studied me for a second, clearly deciding whether there was any more wisdom to extract from the moment. Then, mercifully, he stepped into the shower, peeled the thing off the tile with a square of toilet paper, and dropped it into the trash. I shuddered. He washed his hands, dried them, and gave me a look that was far too smug for a married man who hoped to live. "So," he said casually, "do you understand my experience now?" I stared at him. "That's what you choose to say after terrorizing me?" "I'm asking whether the message landed." "Oh, it landed. It landed with trauma." He grinned. I narrowed my eyes. That grin, that stupid, satisfied grin, that was the moment something shifted in me. Because until then, I had only been reacting. First, with fear, then outrage, then humiliation. But now I was thinking clearly. And clear thinking is dangerous when you are married to someone who has just humiliated you in your own bathroom. Especially when he is still smiling about it. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I deserved it. And maybe I did. Maybe I really had been unfair, leaving him to deal with the disgusting part of our shared shower life while I drifted through existence in a blur of shampoo bottles and vague intentions. Maybe the giant hairball on the wall was, in some dark and twisted way, a justified consequence. But here's the thing. Two things can be true at once. Yes, I probably deserved the lesson. And yes, he absolutely deserved payback. Not revenge that would start a real fight. Not revenge that would cross a line. Not revenge that would make him actually angry. No, he needed something much more elegant. Something that would make him freeze. Something that would make him feel, for one sacred moment, the same confusion and betrayal I had felt when I saw that thing on the wall. Because if marriage is a partnership, then surely emotional damage should be shared. Dan kissed the top of my head and walked away like a man who believed this issue had been successfully resolved. "I'm making coffee," he called. I stayed in the bathroom one more second, looking at my reflection. Glasses on, toothpaste on the counter, cat in the shower, dignity in the grave. And in the middle of all that, slowly rising inside me like the world's pettiest sunrise, came an idea. A terrible idea. A beautiful idea. The kind of idea that arrives fully formed and immediately feels correct. I bent, picked up my toothbrush, and smiled at myself in the mirror. "Okay," I whispered. Callie looked up at me from the shower floor with bright green eyes. I looked at her. She looked at me, and in that moment, with the silent understanding that only two unfairly blamed girls can share, I knew I was not alone. We were going to let him enjoy his victory. For now. Then we were going to ruin his peace in a way so small, so precise, and so perfectly deserved that he would never again weaponize drain hair without first checking over his shoulder. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Dan had poured himself coffee and was leaning against the counter, relaxed and pleased with himself. "How are we feeling?" he asked. "Traumatized," I said. He nodded. "Growth often feels uncomfortable." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not a normal smile. A gentle one. A forgiving one. A smile that made his expression flicker for half a second. Because he knows me. And he knows that when I smile like that after being wronged, it usually means one thing. I'm about to become a problem. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked. I wrapped both hands around my mug and took my time answering. "No reason," I said sweetly. "I just think you've inspired me." His eyes narrowed. "Inspired you to do what?" I took a sip of coffee and lied directly to his face. To do better. He looked relieved. Poor man. He had no idea that by the end of the week, he would beg me to go back to just finding hair in the drain. I did not rush my revenge. That is the difference between amateurs and professionals. An amateur gets angry and reacts immediately. A professional gets calm. That whole first day, I was perfect. Suspiciously perfect. I cleaned the toothpaste off the counter. I wiped the mirror. I even threw away an empty conditioner bottle that had been sitting on the bathtub ledge so long it had become bathroom furniture. And when I showered that night, I bent down, felt around the drain, found the hair, and gathered it out myself. It was disgusting. Slimy, tangled, morally offensive. But I did it. I wrapped it in toilet paper, dropped it in the trash, and walked into the living room with the stiff dignity of a woman doing community service. Dan was on the couch watching one of those shows where men argue passionately about forged swords and historical accuracy. He looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yes." "You look upset." "I'm not upset." "You're carrying yourself like a Victorian widow." I sat in the armchair across from him. I cleaned the drain. There was a pause. Then he gave me a slow nod. Well, I repeated. "I appreciate that." "You're welcome." And for one dangerous second, the whole thing almost ended there. Because there is something very annoying about a husband being calm and reasonable right after being insufferable. If he had laughed again, or made one more smug comment, I could have hated him properly. But instead, he just looked relieved. It made revenge harder. Not impossible. Just harder. Then Callie jumped onto the back of the couch, stepped directly onto his shoulder with all the delicacy of a sack of bricks, and rubbed her face against his ear. Dan winced. Why is she so aggressive with affection? Because she loves with force. She sheds with force, too. That was the moment. Not even rude, just enough to remind me that he still saw himself as the suffering hero of this hairy household. I smiled. You're so brave. He glanced at me. You're mocking me. Never. He went back to his show. Inside my head, gears were turning. Because revenge is not just about causing discomfort. It is about symmetry, poetry, balance. He had used what I feared to teach me a lesson. So what, exactly, did Dan hate? Fear would not work. Dan was the kind of man who trapped spiders in cups and carried them outside like a responsible woodland prince. The kind who investigated strange noises in the dark instead of pretending he had not heard them. So fear would not work. But discomfort? Disruption? The feeling that the world had become slightly, deeply wrong? That could work. Dan was a creature of order. He liked things where they belonged. He liked knowing where the scissors were, where the spare batteries were, and why there was suddenly a random charger on the dining table if no one was actively using it. He liked opening the kitchen cabinet and seeing rows of mugs arranged by size. He liked the remote on the same side table every night. He liked the universe to make sense, which meant I did not need to scare him. I just needed to make the universe stop making sense. The shape of the plan arrived the next morning by accident. Dan was shaving while I stood at the sink brushing my teeth. I had my glasses on, which is how I noticed him freeze and stare at the counter. What? I said around toothpaste. He pointed at his razor. Or rather, at what was resting on top of it. A single, long cat hair. He plucked it off and held it up. How? I shrugged. He looked at Callie, who had wandered in to supervise. Are you doing this on purpose? Callie blinked at him with the calm indifference of a queen who does not answer questions from peasants. He threw the hair away and went back to shaving. But I did not miss the expression on his face. He had not been angry. He had been unsettled. And there it was. The plan. Tiny hair-based haunting. Not enough to make a real mess. Not enough to damage anything. Just enough to make him stop, squint, and feel the cold brush of cosmic injustice. Elegant. Personal. On theme. The first official move happened that afternoon. Dan worked from home 3 days a week, and on Thursdays he always had a video meeting around 2. He liked wearing a collared shirt for these meetings, even though everyone on the call had probably seen him in hoodies and existential decline often enough not to care. At 1:45, he stepped into the bedroom to change. At 1:47, I heard him say, "Are you kidding me?" I bit the inside of my cheek and walked in. What happened? He held up a navy shirt. Across the front, bright and undeniable, clung one single long, pale hair. Not mine. Callie's. He looked at me. This was hanging in the closet. I widened my eyes. Wow. Don't wow me. How does cat hair get inside a closed closet? I considered this. Nature is mysterious. He stared at the hair like it had insulted his ancestors. Then he peeled it off, changed shirts, and left for his meeting. When he was gone, I sat on the bed and shook with silent laughter. The beauty of it was not the hair itself. It was the message. You removed one, but there may be more. By Friday morning, I was fully committed. One hair on the handle of his favorite mug. One on the sleeve of his jacket just before we left for groceries. One stretched across the lid of his laptop after he showered. He opened it, froze, and stood there in silence for 5 full seconds. Finally, he said, to no one and everyone, "This house is mocking me." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom so I could laugh without being seen. But the real joy came from watching his certainty start to crack. At first, he assumed the shedding was random. Then he started checking surfaces before touching them. Then he began removing hairs with the seriousness of a man fighting an invisible enemy. Then came the most satisfying stage of all. He started blaming the cat. "Callie was on my desk," he said Friday evening. "She lives here," I replied. She looked guilty. She always looks guilty. That's just her face. He sat beside me on the couch, tired from the week, and rubbed both hands down his face. There was a long white hair stuck to the cuff of his sweater. I saw it. He did not. And for one breathtaking moment, I considered telling him. Then I thought of the hairball on the shower wall. I said nothing. He leaned back and sighed. We need to brush her more. Now that, unfortunately, was fair. But I was not about to let practical solutions interrupt emotional justice. We can, I said carefully. He looked at me. You sound too calm. I'm growing. You're terrifying when you say things like that. I smiled. He pointed at me. That smile. That's the same smile you had in the kitchen after the bug hair incident. It wasn't a bug hair incident. It was an assault. It was education. It was terrorism. He laughed, and I hate to admit that when Dan really fully laughs, eyes crinkled, head tilted back, it does dangerous things to my resolve. This is one of the inconvenient truths of marriage. The person you most want to annoy is often also the person you want to kiss halfway through the argument. Very inefficient. He put an arm around me and pulled me against his side. You know I love you, right? He said. I settled in, because I am weak and he is warm. Even when I'm blind and leave you gifts in the drain? He kissed the top of my head. Especially then? That should have ended it. But then because the universe adores escalation, he reached down absent-mindedly and found the hair on his own sweater cuff. He plucked it off. His body went still. Very slowly, he turned his head and looked at me. I blinked up at him. What? He held up the hair between two fingers. You saw this. I took a measured breath. I see many things. You absolutely saw this. Maybe. And you said nothing. I believe in personal growth. He stared at me for a long second. Then his eyes narrowed with dawning horror. This is you. I pressed my lips together. The shirt, the mug, the jacket, the laptop, this is you. I finally smiled. Wow, nature really is mysterious. He sat up straight. You little menace. I laughed and slipped away before he could grab me. He lunged. I dodged. Callie, sensing movement, launched herself off the armchair and sprinted in circles around the coffee table as if we were all participating in a ritual she had started. Dan stood in the middle of the living room, holding that single white hair like courtroom evidence. You've been planting cat hair on my belongings? Not just cat hair, I said proudly. Sometimes mine. His mouth fell open. That's worse. It's called layered symbolism. You need help. You put a drain monster on the shower wall. That was one time. And this, I said, backing toward the hallway, has been art. He came after me then, not truly angry, but fully determined. I ran, laughing so hard I nearly slipped, and barely made it into the bedroom before he caught the back of my shirt. Confess, he said. Never. He pulled me back against him, both of us laughing now, and I twisted around to face him. For a second, we just stood there, breathless and ridiculous. Then he said, You know this means war. That should have sounded playful. Instead, something in the way he said it made the back of my neck prickle. Not because I was scared, because I knew that tone. He was amused. He was impressed. And worst of all, he was already planning something. I felt my smile falter. Dan saw it and grinned slowly, like a man rediscovering purpose. Oh no, I said. Oh yes, he replied. Then he let go of me, patted my shoulder with fake kindness, and walked out of the room, calmly, which was far more frightening than if he had chased me. From the hallway, he called back in a cheerful voice. By the way, I have a dentist appointment Monday morning, so if you're planning nonsense before then, remember I can still escalate. I stared after him, then looked down. There, on the front of my shirt, was a single dark hair, freshly placed. My mouth dropped open. He had planted one on me while holding me. That snake. That absolute, manipulative, deeply attractive snake. Callie appeared in the doorway, tail high, as if arriving to inspect the battlefield. I picked up the hair from my shirt and held it up. He's learning, I told her. Callie meowed once. And I swear, in that moment, it sounded less like concern and more like a challenge. Because now, this was no longer about one shower prank. Now it was a contest. And contests have winners. By Sunday night, I had a plan so beautiful it almost made me emotional. Not because it was cruel, because it was balanced. There is a line between revenge and correction, and I had no intention of crossing it. I did not want to hurt Dan. I did not want to damage anything he owned. I did not want to ruin his week. I just wanted to interrupt his peace with the same precision he had used on mine. And to do that, I needed to understand something fundamental about my husband. Dan is not just a routine person. Dan is a Monday routine person. His weekday mornings run on rails. Alarm at 6:30. Second alarm at 6:37, because apparently the first one is just a polite suggestion. Shower. Coffee. Standing at the mirror doing whatever mysterious facial maintenance men do when they are preparing to be perceived by society. Get dressed. Pat pockets. Keys. Wallet. Phone. Leave. It is mechanical. Sacred. If anything breaks the rhythm, Dan becomes deeply uncomfortable, not loudly uncomfortable. He does not stomp or yell. He just starts moving with a tighter jaw and shorter answers, like a man trying very hard to remain civilized while the universe fails basic competence. Which is why Monday morning mattered, because Monday morning was the perfect battlefield. He had a dentist appointment before work. He hated dentists. Not fearfully, like me and Bugs. More in the grim, resigned way of a soldier being sent back to war. The night before a dentist appointment, he flossed like he was preparing for inspection. The morning of, he brushed with unusual aggression and checked his teeth in the mirror like a man searching for betrayal. So yes, Monday mattered. My first idea had been to move something small, his watch, his keys, his wallet, but that was too obvious, too easy. And also dangerous, because if you mess with an adult's keys on a weekday morning, you are no longer flirting with petty revenge. You are applying to become a real enemy. No, this needed to be elegant, subtle, psychological. Not his keys. Not his wallet. His toothbrush. Now, before you judge me, let me explain. I did not contaminate it. I did not damage it. I did not do anything disgusting or unhygienic. I simply replaced it with an identical one. Same brand, same color, same shape. The only difference was that the new one belonged to the unopened backup pack under the sink and had never been used before. To a reasonable person, this sounds harmless. To Dan, a man who notices when a mug has been moved half an inch to the left, it was going to feel like reality itself had shifted. At 11:20 that night, after confirming he was truly asleep and not doing that fake sleep nonsense he sometimes does when he wants to win an argument by refusing to continue it, I slipped out of bed and padded into the bathroom. I turned on only the small nightlight. Enough glow to see shapes, not enough to wake the household. I opened the cabinet under the sink and found the backup toothbrush pack right where it always was, because of course it was. Dan alphabetizes nothing, but somehow still arranges bathroom supplies like he is preparing them for military service. I took out the matching brush. Then I stared at the two of them in my hand. One used, one new, nearly identical. Perfect. I swapped them. Then, because I am a professional, I took the old one, dried the handle, and put it into the backup pack so it would not sit there in the trash incriminating me like a witness begging to be questioned. I stood back and smiled. The toothbrush sat in its usual spot, completely innocent, completely correct, completely wrong. From the doorway, I heard a soft sound. I turned. Callie was there, sitting in the dark, watching me. I put one finger to my lips. Don't. She blinked once, then walked away like she had decided not to report me to the authorities. I got back into bed feeling like a criminal genius. Dan stirred, rolled toward me, and dropped one arm heavily across my waist. Half asleep, he mumbled, "Why are you cold?" "Because I'm mysterious," I whispered. He made a sleepy sound that might have been nonsense and fell still again. I did not sleep well after that. Not because of guilt, because of anticipation. There is almost nothing more difficult than waiting for a prank to mature. What if he did not notice? What if he noticed and did not care? What if I had built an entire emotional cathedral around a toothbrush switch that turned out to be meaningless? These are the thoughts that haunt a petty woman at 2:14 a.m. By 6:28, I was fully awake and pretending not to be. Dan's first alarm went off. He silenced it. The second one rang, and he sat up with the slow dignity of a man returning to duty. I kept my eyes mostly closed, enough to maintain plausible sleepiness. He stood, stretched, scratched lightly at his jaw, and shuffled toward the bathroom. The door closed. Water ran. Cabinet opened. Then, silence. Beautiful silence. A few seconds passed. Then, I heard him say, very quietly, "What?" I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I nearly saw stars. More silence. Then, the sound of the toothbrush being picked up. Then, set down. Then picked up again. I could picture it perfectly. The frown. The narrowed eyes. That slight tilt of his head he gets when reality refuses to cooperate. Then he called out, "Are you awake?" I made my voice thick with fake sleep. No. There was a pause. Then, "Can you come here?" I rolled onto my back and groaned. Why? Just come here. There it was. The tone. Not angry. Not panicked. Unsettled. I sat up, rubbed my eyes for theater, and walked to the bathroom doorway. Dan stood at the sink in pajama pants, toothbrush in hand, staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. What? He held it up. "Did you replace this?" I blinked. Replace what? My toothbrush. I looked at it, then at him, then back at it. No. His eyes narrowed. "You're lying." That's a strong accusation for 6:30 in the morning. This is not my toothbrush. It looks exactly like your toothbrush. It is not. How can you tell? He looked at me like I had asked how he could tell the difference between the sun and a shoe. Because mine was... He trailed off. I kept my face calm. Was what? He stared harder at the toothbrush, as if the truth might rise from the plastic if he suffered enough. It was... He frowned. More worn. Of course it was more worn. You use it. Yes. So this one looks newer because you're comparing it to a mental image of your old one. He slowly lowered the brush. That sounds fake. Dan, I said gently, are you having a toothbrush identity crisis? His mouth flattened. Normally, that expression would warn me to stop. Instead, it gave me life. He turned the toothbrush over in his hand. Why does it feel different? Because now you're holding it with suspicion. I am serious. So am I. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, to my delight, he stepped past me and opened the cabinet under the sink. He searched the backup supplies, moved the toothpaste, lifted the floss, shifted the cotton pads. Looking for proof. Looking for a break in the pattern. He found nothing. Because I had thought of that. He straightened slowly. A tiny crack had appeared in his composure. I almost felt bad. Almost. He brushed anyway, but with the grave expression of a man forced to continue life under uncertain conditions. Every few seconds, he stopped and looked at the toothbrush handle again, as if expecting it to confess. I leaned against the doorframe. You know, I said, this is a very interesting reaction from someone who once displayed a giant drain hairball on the shower wall. His eyes flicked to mine in the mirror. That was educational. And this, I said softly, is spiritual. He rinsed his mouth, spit, and pointed the toothbrush at me. If I find out you messed with my dental routine before a dentist appointment, I will never know peace again. Maybe growth feels uncomfortable. He stared. I smiled. And that was when he knew. Not what I had done, but that I had done something. He set the toothbrush down with exaggerated care. You are enjoying this too much. You enjoyed the bug incident. That was one moment. This is a journey. He splashed water on his face and dried it harder than necessary. Then he looked at the sink. Then at me. Then back at the sink. "Is anything else wrong in here?" he asked. There are few joys greater than being asked that by the person you are actively tormenting. I widened my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, "should I be worried about anything else?" "No," I said, "and because I am a wife, I told the truth in the most misleading way available. You should just continue your routine." He did not like that answer. I could tell because he began checking things. The toothpaste cap, the floss, the razor, the hand towel, the mouthwash level. At one point, he picked up his face wash and sniffed it. I had done nothing to the face wash, but the fact that he no longer trusted his own bathroom brought me such terrible joy that I had to leave before I laughed out loud. In the kitchen, I started the coffee machine and stood with both hands on the counter, shoulders shaking silently. A minute later, Dan walked in, fully dressed, tie in hand, still looking mildly haunted. He stopped in the doorway. "You switched my toothbrush." I turned. "Prove it. You admitted it with your face. That is not admissible. I know you. That sounds biased." He pointed at me. "This is retaliation." "This," I said, pouring coffee, "is accountability." He tied his tie while staring at me, which no one should do because neck-based knot work and emotional distraction are a dangerous combination. "You do realize," he said, "that this changes things." "How?" "You escalated." "Incorrect. I diversified." He let out a laugh before he could stop himself, and I hated how handsome he looked even while suspicious and sleep-deprived. Then he glanced at the clock and cursed under his breath. Now we were in the interesting phase. He had somewhere to be. He did not have time to fully investigate. He had to leave with uncertainty. That was the masterpiece. He grabbed his coat from the hook by the door, shoved one arm in, then paused. His face changed. Slowly, he reached to the shoulder of the coat and lifted off one single pale cat hair. I had not put that one there. That one was authentic, which made it better. He looked at the hair, then at me, then toward the hallway where Callie sat washing herself in a stripe of morning light like a paid actress waiting for her close-up. Dan pointed at the cat. "I can't even tell when it's really her anymore." "Maybe that's the lesson," I said. He put the hair in the trash with the tired resignation of a man realizing the line between prank and reality had dissolved. Then he came over, kissed my forehead, and said, "You are impossible." I took a sip of coffee, and yet, beloved, he sighed, tragically. Then he headed for the door. Just before stepping out, he turned back and narrowed his eyes. "When I come home, this house had better be normal." I gave him a serene smile. "Of course." He left. I waited until I heard the car start. Then I counted to 10. Then I bent over the kitchen counter and laughed so hard I nearly dropped my mug. From the hallway, Callie meowed. "You understand me," I told her. She blinked slowly. For the first half of the morning, I floated through the house like a woman who had finally achieved inner alignment. The prank had worked. He noticed. He cared. He had no proof. Perfection. Then, at 10:15, my phone buzzed. A text from Dan. "Did you do something to my floss too?" I stared at it and burst out laughing. Then I typed back. "No, why?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then, "It feels different." I pressed a hand over my mouth. I had done absolutely nothing to his floss. The man was unraveling on his own. I typed, "Maybe you're growing." No response came for almost 15 minutes. Then my phone buzzed again. "I hate your energy today." I laughed so hard Callie jumped off the chair beside me. The problem with winning early, though, is that it can make you reckless. That afternoon, high on success, I made a mistake. A small one. A stupid one. The kind that seems harmless until you realize you have just handed your enemy a loaded weapon. I was folding laundry when I heard the front door open much earlier than expected. My stomach dropped. Dan never came home this early from a dentist appointment unless something had changed. I stepped into the hallway. He was standing there with his coat still on, one hand on the doorknob, looking calm. Too calm. That was the first sign. The second sign was that he was not carrying coffee. Dan always bought coffee after dentist appointments as a reward for surviving. The third sign was the way his eyes moved over my face with a quiet, thoughtful amusement. "How did it go?" I asked. "Fine," he said. Only one word. Also dangerous. "Everything okay?" He took off his coat slowly and hung it up. Then he reached into the pocket and pulled out my glasses cloth, the soft little one I keep by the bathroom sink. He held it between two fingers. I felt my blood go cold. I had used it the night before to dry the handle of the swapped toothbrush. And in my triumph, I had absent-mindedly tucked it into his coat pocket while cleaning the counter that morning, probably moving too fast and too smug to notice. Dan raised one eyebrow. "This," he said softly, "was in my coat pocket." I opened my mouth. "Closed it." He smiled. Not wide, not cruel. Just enough. Just the tiniest, deadliest smile. "Oh no," I whispered. He stepped closer. "So," he said, voice calm and almost pleasant, "would now be a good time for you to explain why your glasses cloth was traveling with me to the dentist?" I took one step back. He took one step forward. And that was when I realized something awful. I had not won. I had only entertained him. Because now he had proof. And a man like Dan, once given proof, does not just retaliate. He plans. I looked toward the living room. Callie was there, watching, absolutely useless. I looked back at my husband. He tilted his head. "You switched the toothbrush." I drew in a slow breath. Then, because denial had officially died, I did the only thing left. I smiled. "Maybe," I said. Dan laughed once under his breath. And somehow that was worse than if he had shouted. Because that laugh meant one thing. He was not upset. He was inspired. He folded the cloth neatly and slipped it back into his pocket. Then he kissed my cheek like a man leaving church and said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked weakly. "For reminding me," he said, heading toward the kitchen, "that I've been going too easy on you." I stared after him in silence. Then I turned to Callie. "This is your fault too." She yawned in my face. And later that night, after dinner, Dan leaned close enough for only me to hear and said, "Tomorrow morning, don't scream." Then he walked away. I stood frozen at the sink, plate in hand, heart already pounding. Behind me, Callie jumped onto a chair and flicked her tail. And somewhere deep in my bones, I knew one thing. Whatever he had planned for Tuesday, it was going to be personal. I did not sleep well Monday night. That might sound dramatic, but I want to be clear. I am not saying I tossed and turned because I feared for my life. I am saying I slept lightly because I was married to a man who had leaned into my personal space, lowered his voice, and told me, "Tomorrow morning, don't scream." That is not a sentence you hear, and then drift peacefully into dreamland. That is a sentence that follows you. A sentence that sits on your chest. A sentence that makes every creak in the house sound suspicious and every movement beside you in bed feel tactical. Dan, of course, slept beautifully. Because men like him commit emotional crimes and then enter deep restorative sleep like infants who have done nothing wrong. When I woke up, it was quiet. Too quiet. Sunlight pressed softly around the curtains. The house had that still, suspended feeling it gets in the first few minutes of morning when everything is technically normal but somehow waiting. I turned my head. Dan's side of the bed was empty. Not unusual on a weekday. But under the circumstances, every normal thing had become suspicious. I sat up slowly. The bedroom door was open. No smell of coffee. No sound of the shower. No clink of dishes in the kitchen. Nothing. My heart started doing that annoying theatrical thud it does whenever my brain begins narrating my own life like a horror movie. "Stop it," I muttered. I reached for my glasses and put them on. No fake spiders on the ceiling. No mysterious object on my pillow. No cat hair arranged into threatening messages. So far, so good. I stepped into the hallway. Empty. The bathroom door stood open. I leaned and looked inside. Everything looked normal. Sink, towels, shower, bottles. the familiar arrangement of ordinary domestic life. And because I am not stupid, I did not walk in right away. I stood at the threshold and studied the room like a bomb technician. There is a specific humiliation in being forced to conduct a visual safety inspection of your own bathroom because your husband has turned the house into a low-stakes psychological war zone. Still, I checked. Mirror. Fine. Counter. Fine. Toothbrushes. In place. Shower wall. Clear. Drain. Not visible from here, which somehow felt ominous even though that was just how drains work. I took one step in. Nothing happened. Another step. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly. Maybe he had only been bluffing. Maybe this whole eerie quiet was just a final flourish to make me suspicious of shadows and shampoo bottles. That would have been clever. Cruel, but clever. I moved toward the sink. And then I saw it. Not on the wall. Not in the shower. In the mirror. Written in the anti-fog patch in huge, crooked letters. Check the drain. I let out a sound so small and offended it barely counted as language. Then I closed my eyes and breathed through my nose. Unbelievable, I whispered. Not a scream, but close enough to irritate me. He had not gone for pure terror. He had gone for tension. That man, that deeply manipulative, highly organized man. The message sat there like a dare. Check the drain. He knew exactly what he was doing. If I ignored it, then he won, because I was afraid. If I checked and found something awful, he won because I walked straight into it. There was no version of this morning where he did not get to be smug. I hated that. I hated it with the pure force of a woman who had just realized her opponent had matured. I bent slightly, trying to see the shower drain from outside. Nothing. Of course, nothing. You cannot see it from that angle. That was the whole point. I looked back at the mirror. Checked the drain. I could practically hear his voice. Calm, mild, completely pleased with himself. I crossed my arms and glared at the shower like it had personally betrayed me. Then, because dignity is important, I said out loud to the empty room, I am not scared of you. From the hallway came a faint meow. Callie, no help. I stepped into the shower, carefully. One foot in, then the other. I kept my eyes down. The drain came into view, and there, arranged around it in a messy little circle, were dozens of tiny dark tufts. Hair. So much hair. For one wild second, my heart jumped again, because the amount of it looked unnatural, almost alive, like some nest of tiny creatures had gathered for ritual purposes. Then my brain caught up. It was not bugs. It was not mold. It was hair. Clean, dry, brushed-out hair. Mine. Callie's. Probably a little from Dan's beard brush, too, because he is the kind of monster who would curate mixed media for effect. There was so much of it. Not wet and disgusting like drain hair. Dry and fluffy and almost decorative. He had made a wreath. A literal hair wreath around the drain. I just stared. Then, to my own horror, I started laughing. Not because it was funny immediately, because it was absurd. So absurd, my outrage got confused and took a wrong turn into disbelief. He had not just gathered hair, he had planned composition. He had written, "Check the drain" on the mirror like a deranged spa employee. This was art. Terrible art. Offensive art. But art. Wow, I said softly to the empty shower. You've really grown. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of restrained laughter. Kitchen. Of course. He was in the kitchen. Listening. Waiting. The snake had been waiting the whole time. I marched down the hallway, still in my pajamas, glasses on, dignity bruised but operational. Dan was leaning against the kitchen counter with a coffee mug in one hand, looking out the window with the fake innocence of a man who absolutely knew he was seconds away from confrontation. I stopped in the doorway. You made a hair wreath. He took a slow sip of coffee before turning to me. Good morning. You made a wreath. He looked thoughtful. That's a strong word. No, it's actually the exact word. He shrugged. I prefer installation. I stared at him. He smiled into his mug. That maddening, controlled little smile that said he was pleased, not just with the prank, but with its execution. "You told me not to scream," I said. "And you didn't. That was manipulative. That was considerate. You wrote on the mirror. Yes. You staged a scene. Yes. You harvested household hair like a villain in a fairy tale." At that, he laughed properly. "That is the closest you've come to understanding my vision. I should have been furious. I was furious. But I was also losing dangerous ground to amusement, which is one of the risks of loving someone funny. Sometimes your enemy lands the joke too well. I crossed the kitchen and pointed at him. "This is escalation." "No," he said. "This is refinement." "Oh, shut up." He held up one hand in surrender, but his face stayed bright with victory. "Come on." That was good. It was unhinged. It was memorable. You had materials sorted by texture. That took longer than expected, actually. I blinked. "You're admitting that? Why would I hide greatness? I hate confident men, especially when I married one." I went to the cabinet for my mug and found it already sitting on the counter beside the coffee machine. Ready, placed exactly where I like it. That tiny act of sweetness almost annoyed me more than the prank. Because there he was, emotional terrorist and considerate husband in the same body, making it impossible to sustain pure hatred. I poured coffee. Dan watched me over the rim of his mug. Well, what? Was it effective? I looked at him over my shoulder. "Do you want an honest answer?" Yes, I said. "It was effective." He nodded once, like a man receiving professional feedback. "And deeply weird. Also fair." I turned fully toward him. "Fair? You planted hair on my belongings for 4 days. That was poetry. This was response. This was curation. Thank you." I made a face and walked to the table. Callie jumped onto the chair beside me like she had been summoned by the mention of her craft. Her tail curled around her feet. Her expression said she regretted nothing. Dan sat across from me. Then he said, "There's more." I looked up slowly. "What do you mean there's more?" He raised his eyebrows. "You thought I was done?" My stomach dipped. Not pleasant. "What did you do?" "Nothing harmful." That is not reassuring. He folded his hands around his mug. "I left you a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "To clean the drain." I stared. "Where?" He smiled. I stood immediately. "No." He laughed. "Sit down. Tell me where." "No." Dan. "No." That was the thing about this phase of the war. We both understood each other too well. He knew I would not be able to let it go. He knew that once I heard there was a second part, I would start searching automatically. Every room would become suspicious. Every surface would feel like a potential message. And because he knew that, he had already won a second time. I hated that too. I checked the bathroom counter. Nothing. Laundry basket. Nothing. Bedroom nightstand. Nothing. Living room coffee table. Nothing. Dan stayed in the kitchen, occasionally calling out deeply unhelpful things like warmer. And that would have been a good spot, actually. I ignored him. Mostly. Then I went back to the bedroom and stood in the middle of the room, thinking. Reminder. Not harmful. About the drain. Somewhere I would definitely see it eventually. Then my eyes landed on the chair in the corner where I had draped tomorrow's clothes the night before. I walked over slowly. There, laid neatly across the folded sweater I had planned to wear, was a thin silver chain. My chain. The little one I wear almost every day. And hanging from it, not a pendant, a tiny circle made of twisted hair. I stopped moving. He had made a tiny version. A miniature drain wreath necklace. I picked it up with 2 fingers. It was ridiculous. So ridiculous, my brain could not choose a single emotional response. Horror? Laughter? Admiration? Divorce? I was still holding it when Dan appeared in the doorway. He looked at my face and immediately started grinning. You found it. You made jewelry. I made a statement piece. You turned shed hair into accessories. You say that like innovation is a crime. I lifted the necklace slightly. This is insane. It's memorable. You need supervision. Yet you married me unsupervised. There are moments in marriage where language fails because what you are dealing with is simply too stupid and too specific to fit inside a normal argument. This was one of those moments. I looked from the tiny hair pendant to my husband, then back again, then back to him. I need you to understand, I said slowly, that this has changed how I see you. Hopefully, for the better. For the weirder, I'll take it. I should have thrown the thing at him. I should have demanded terms. I should have delivered some strong speech about boundaries and the spiritual burden of living with a man who repurposes bathroom waste into symbolic adornment. Instead, I did the worst possible thing. I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to sit on the edge of the bed. Dan came farther into the room, hands in his pockets, looking far too pleased with himself. "That bad?" he asked. "That good," I admitted, which cost me something. He gave a small bow, like a performer accepting applause after a deeply upsetting show. "You are impossible," I told him. "And you," he said, left cat hair on my laptop. That was a measured response. This was a measured response. I looked at the necklace again, still half horrified. Then I narrowed my eyes. "Wait, what? How did you even make this?" He hesitated. There it was. The first crack. I stood up slowly. "Dan." He stepped back once. "Don't make it weird. You braided it? It was mostly twisting. You spent actual time crafting hair jewelry. It took less time than you think. That is somehow worse." He laughed and backed farther into the hallway as I advanced with the necklace held out like evidence in a murder case. "You are not framing this honestly," he said. "Oh, I'm framing it perfectly honestly? You started this. You started this with a fake bug. You responded with a haunting. You retaliated with arts and crafts." He held up both hands. "And yet here we are." There was a pause. We both felt it. That small shift when the game became something else. Because somewhere between the hair haunting, the toothbrush switch, the mirror message, and the tiny disgusting necklace, the original score had started to blur. This was not about the drain anymore. Not really. This was about being seen. Annoyingly, intimately, completely seen. Dan saw every little thing about me. My terrible eyesight, my routines, my blind spots, my habit of apologizing for a problem before actually fixing it. And I saw him too, his need for order, his pride in being competent, his weakness for tiny domestic victories, his belief that if he was clever enough, he could always stay one step ahead. We were both exposing each other, and enjoying it far too much. I lowered the necklace slowly. Dan looked at me, less smug now, more curious. Then he said softer, "You know I'm mostly kidding, right?" I looked down at the hair pendant. "Mostly?" He smiled. "I do want you to clean the drain." I rolled my eyes. "There it is! There it is." I walked past him to the dresser and set the necklace down. Then I turned back. "Fine," I said. "I clean the drain better. You stop weaponizing household waste." "That seems fair." "And no more surprise bathroom installations?" He tilted his head. "Define installation." "Dan." Okay. "And no more symbolic grooming-based intimidation." That made him laugh again. "You make everything sound like a court case." "Because I am building one." He leaned against the doorframe. "So, we're calling a truce?" I opened my mouth. And really, truly, I meant to say yes. But before I could say it, something small and white drifted down between us. We both watched it fall. A single cat hair. It landed on the front of Dan's dark t-shirt, right over his heart. Silence. Then I looked up at him. He looked down at the hair, then back at me, and something in his expression changed. Because we both knew, instantly, absolutely, I had not done that. He brushed the hair off slowly. From the hallway came the soft pat of paws. Callie walked past the bedroom door without looking at either of us, tail high, moving with the confidence of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. Dan and I turned our heads at the same time to watch her go. Then we looked at each other. And for the first time all week, neither of us spoke. Because there was only one thing more dangerous than a prank war between two married adults. A third player entering the game. That night, while brushing my teeth, I found 3 white hairs arranged carefully on the bathroom counter beside my glasses. Not clumped. Not random. 3. Parallel. Intentional. I called out from the bathroom, "Dan." From the bedroom, he answered, "What? Did you do this?" A pause. Then, "No." I walked to the doorway and held up the evidence. He looked at it, then looked at me, and very slowly, very carefully, we both turned toward the bed. Callie was sitting on it, watching us. Her tail curled neatly around her paws. Her face unreadable. I know how this sounds. I do. I know cats do not stage symbolic threats. I know all of that. And yet, Dan came to stand beside me. We both looked at the cat. The cat looked at us. Then, with chilling calm, she stood, turned in a circle, and lay down exactly on Dan's pillow. I swallowed. Dan folded his arms, and in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the room, he said, "I think she's picked a side." I know how insane that sounds. I know how ridiculous it is for 2 adults to stand in their bedrooms staring at a cat like she has become politically active. And yet there I was. Dan stood beside me with his arms folded, and together we watched our fluffy little bathroom goblin loaf herself directly onto his pillow like she had just seized territory by force. 3 white hairs still sat on my fingers, placed beside my glasses. Too neat to feel accidental. Too stupid to explain. Too small to ignore. Callie blinked once, slowly, then tucked one paw under her chest and closed her eyes as if to say, "This bed is mine now. Continue your little marriage drama elsewhere." Dan was the first to speak. "Well," he said quietly, "that's threatening." I turned to him. "You admit it's threatening?" "I admit I don't care for the timing." She left hair beside my glasses. She also sits in the bathroom sink and yells at running water. Her motives are not transparent. That did not look random. He looked at the cat, then back at me. We need to be careful not to assign organized intent to a tiny criminal. Callie opened one eye. I pointed at her. That right there. That is not the face of innocence. Dan rubbed one hand over his mouth, trying not to laugh. This was how the whole thing kept going off the rails. No matter how ridiculous it got, one of us would say something stupidly sincere, and the other would almost lose composure. Then somehow we would both get serious again like this was an active investigation. He stepped forward and gently tapped the mattress near Callie. "Move." She did not move. He tapped again. Nothing. Then, without even lifting her head, she stretched one fluffy front leg across his pillow. A claim. A statement. An occupation. Dan looked back at me. She definitely picked a side. "I told you." "You implied." Annoyingly. Repeatedly. And I was right. He sighed the sigh of a man who had spent a week weaponizing household hair only to find himself possibly outplayed by a mammal with no taxes and no job. He bent down, scooped Callie into his arms, and held her against his chest. She did not protest. She simply stared at me over his shoulder with the serene confidence of a dictator being carried through a parade. "You're loving this too much," Dan said. "I warned you not to involve civilians." "She was never a civilian," he muttered. That, unfortunately, was true. Dan set her on the floor and closed the bedroom door behind her with the solemn caution of a man containing a supernatural force. Then he turned to me. So, I repeated. We stood there in the soft bedroom light, tired and amused, and slightly frayed in the intimate way only marriage can produce. The hair necklace still sat on the dresser. The mirror message had faded. The emotional damage remained fresh. Dan shoved both hands into the pockets of his sweatpants and tilted his head. Maybe we should end this before one of us starts laminating evidence. I looked at him. You made jewelry. You switched my toothbrush. You curated a hair wreath. You haunted my wardrobe. You wrote on the mirror like a serial killer with excellent penmanship." That made him laugh. Really laugh. Full laugh. Head tipped back, shoulders loose, the whole unfairly charming thing. And just like that, my remaining outrage weakened again. I hate that. There should be a law against your enemy being attractive while admitting guilt. He looked at me after the laughter faded and said, "Softer now." Okay, serious question? Are we done? The sensible answer was yes. The obvious answer was yes. The adult answer was urgently yes. I looked at him. At the face, I knew better than my own sometimes. The face that had annoyed me all week made me laugh in spite of myself, scared me in the bathroom, kissed my forehead before work, and somehow turned a stupid problem about shower hair into a full domestic saga. Then I looked toward the closed door, where, on the other side, a fluffy anarchist was probably shedding strategically. And suddenly the whole week hit me at once. The scream, the fake bug, the toothbrush suspicion, the hair haunting, the mirror message, the tiny necklace, the absurdity of two adults who loved each other very much, choosing to communicate partly through symbolic nonsense instead of just fixing the drain like normal people. I started laughing. Not polite laughter. The helpless kind. The kind that folds you in half and steals your breath. Dan stared at me for half a second, then started laughing too. And that was it. That was the collapse. All the tension, all the competition, all the carefully protected pride just broke apart in the middle of our bedroom, because once you reach a certain level of ridiculousness, the only thing left to do is admit it. I sat on the edge of the bed because my knees had gone weak from laughing. Dan leaned against the dresser, wiping under one eye. "We are embarrassing." I managed. "We are," he agreed. "You made a tiny hair pendant. You planted hairs on my mug. I thought you were losing your mind over floss." I was losing my mind over floss. That sent me into another round of laughter. Dan came over and sat beside me on the bed, close enough that our shoulders touched. For a minute, neither of us said anything. The room quieted. The house felt normal again. Not because the evidence was gone. The evidence was everywhere, but because we had finally reached the point beneath the jokes. The real thing. He glanced at me. "You know I wasn't actually trying to scare you that badly with the hairball, right?" I looked down at my hands. "I know." "I really thought you'd just be grossed out." I was grossed out. Then briefly possessed by fear. He smiled with one corner of his mouth. "Fair." I nudged his shoulder. "And for the record, I really wasn't trying to make you think you were unraveling as a person. You absolutely were. Only a little. That's still a lot, depending on the target." I leaned back on my hands. "Okay, real talk?" He nodded. "I know I've been bad about the drain." "There," said plainly. "No jokes. No performance. Just true." Dan's expression shifted. Not triumphant, just softer. "I know you don't mean to be," he said. "I really don't. It's just one of those things that somehow never feels immediate to me in the moment. I know. And the glasses thing is part of it, but not all of it." He waited. I looked toward the bathroom. "Some of it is just that I got used to you handling it." That was uglier to admit, because that was the real thing under the real thing. Not blindness. Not routine. Not forgetfulness. Comfort. The lazy kind that grows in relationships when one person quietly keeps doing a chore and the other, without deciding to, starts assuming it will somehow keep getting done. Dan nodded once. "That's the part that bugged me. Not the hair itself. Not the cleaning. The invisibility of it. The way it had become his problem by default." I looked at him. "You should have told me that." He gave me a look. Then I winced. "Okay, no. You did tell me. Repeatedly. A few times. 100 times. At least enough for there to be a hairball installation." That was still unhinged. He grinned. "Effective, though." I stared at him. Then I sighed. Annoyingly effective. He reached over and took my hand, thumb rubbing lightly across my knuckles. And because the universe hates letting a moment stay serious for long, there it was again, that unfair tenderness in the middle of conflict. 1 minute, you are accusing each other of psychological warfare through bathroom symbolism. The next minute, you are sitting knee to knee, holding hands, talking honestly about labor and habits, and being taken for granted. I squeezed his hand. "Okay," I said. "I'll do better for real." He lifted an eyebrow. "For real, for real, for real, for real. You're not just saying that because I'm handsome and emotionally correct? You are barely handsome right now." Interesting thing to say while holding my hand. I said barely. He smiled. Then he said, "And I'll stop using horror-based teaching methods. Thank you. No more hair exhibits. Thank you. No more conceptual drain reminders. Yes, thank you. No more wearable statements." I looked toward the dresser. "Burn that thing." He laughed. "Fine. I mean it. Fine. And if you ever put something on the shower wall again, I will tell people." He nodded solemnly. Fair. We were quiet again after that. The kind of quiet that means the fight is over, even if the cleanup remains. Then Dan said, "There should probably be a system." I turned to him. "A system? For the drain. Of course." Even in the ashes of war, the man wanted infrastructure. And honestly, he was right. Because the truth is, good intentions are useless without design. I could keep meaning to do better, but if the habit still depended on me spontaneously remembering a task I barely noticed and had spent years unconsciously avoiding, we would be right back here in a month, except next time he might move on from hair art to theater. So we built a stupid little marriage system right there on the bed. Simple, clear, hard to ignore. From now on, after every shower, I would do a quick fingertip sweep near the drain before stepping out. Not a full inspection, not a dramatic ritual, just a few seconds. If I caught anything, it went straight into the trash. If I forgot and Dan saw buildup, he would not silently become a martyr or start collecting visual aids. He would tell me once, directly, that same day. No simmering, no symbolism, no wall displays. And because fairness matters, we added one more rule. If either of us turns a domestic annoyance into performance art again, the other person automatically wins. Dan considered that, then nodded. That's strong. I know. What counts as performance art? I pointed toward the dresser. Exhibit A. He winced. Fair. At that exact moment, we heard a soft thump outside the door. Then another. Then the tiny scratch, scratch, scratch of paws. We looked at each other. Dan stood and opened the bedroom door. Callie walked in immediately, like a landlord entering property she owned outright. In her mouth was something. She trotted to the rug and dropped it between us. We both leaned down. A clump of hair. Not huge. Not wet. Just a small, dry little tuft she had apparently gathered from her brushing corner near the hallway vent and delivered like an offering to the gods of conflict. Dan straightened slowly. I covered my mouth. There was a beat of silence. Then I said, very quietly, "She wants negotiations reopened." Dan turned to look at me. I looked at him, and then we both broke again. I laughed so hard I had to sit back down. Dan bent over with both hands on his knees, shaking with it. Callie, deeply pleased with herself, jumped onto the bed and settled in the exact warm space Dan had just vacated. Like a queen, like a mastermind, like someone who had been waiting all week for the humans to catch up. When I could finally breathe again, I wiped tears from my face and said, "We are never telling anyone this." Dan sat beside me once more, still laughing under his breath. "We absolutely are not." Then he looked at the cat, looked at the little tuft on the rug, and shook his head. "I can't believe I lost a prank war to both of you." "You didn't lose," I said. He glanced at me. "Didn't I?" I thought about that. The truth was funny, and a little annoying, and probably the most marriage-shaped answer possible. "No," I said. "We both lost, which means we both won." He made a face. "That's a terrible sentence." "It's also correct." He slid an arm around my shoulders and pulled me into his side. I let him. Because after all the ridiculousness, after all the pettiness, after all the hair-based propaganda, the thing underneath it had stayed simple. He loved me enough to care. I loved him enough to be embarrassed. We both loved each other enough to turn a stupid problem into a game instead of a wound. That does not mean the game was wise. It definitely was not wise. But it meant something. And maybe that is what marriage is a lot of the time. Not grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but two weird people trying to love each other through habits, annoyances, blind spots, and repeated evidence that neither one should be left unsupervised for long. Dan kissed the top of my head. "You're cleaning the drain tomorrow," he said. I looked up at him. "You are ruining the ending. I'm preserving the lesson." I sighed. "Yes, I'm cleaning the drain tomorrow. And no more revenge." I glanced at Callie, who was now washing one paw with criminal calm. "No promises about her?" He followed my gaze. "That's fair." Then he looked back at me. I looked back at him, and because peace in this house is always a little unstable, I said the one thing I absolutely should not have said. Very softly. Very thoughtfully. "You know," Dan's eyes narrowed immediately. "No. I'm just saying, no. If you had not put the original hairball on the wall, no. None of this would have happened." He pointed at me. "Don't start." I smiled. He saw the smile, and before I could even finish forming the next terrible sentence, he lunged. I shrieked and fell backward laughing as he caught me around the waist and dragged me across the bed while Callie sprang up in outrage and launched herself off the blanket like a furry witness fleeing the scene. "No more war," he said, pinning my wrists lightly. "No more wall monsters," I countered. "No more toothbrush tampering. No more handmade hair accessories. That one was objectively creative. That one was objectively grounds." He bent and kissed me before I could continue, which was annoying but effective. When he pulled back, I was still smiling. He was too, and outside the bedroom, morning began like normal. Pipes settling, light shifting, coffee scent lingering faintly in the air. Somewhere in the hallway, Callie gave a demanding little meow as if to remind us that while peace may have been declared between the humans, the third party remained unpredictable. Dan rested his forehead briefly against mine. "Truce?" he said. This time, I meant it. Truce. He let go of my wrists. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and from the floor near the bed, where the tiny abandoned hair tuft still sat like a cursed peace offering, the whole stupid week finally settled into what it really was. Not just revenge, not just pettiness, not just a lesson about the drain, but one of those ridiculous little marriage stories that would probably embarrass us forever and make us laugh for years. Even if, every now and then, when I walk into the bathroom with my glasses on, I still check the shower wall first.